Hello and welcome back, my fantastic financiers. You are listening to the Do.Different.Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. I am the founder of Social Impact Now and founder and CEO of Connective Institute, as well as managing partner for the Integrated Capital Fund. So glad to have you back. Today is going to be such an amazing show. I can't even tell you. One of my homies, my besties, I adore this person so much, and they are going to have so much to share with you. They are actually going to blow your mind. But before we get into that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my guest today, which is Cindy Willard from Impact Charitable. So a little bit about Cindy. Cindy helps turn bold ideas into investments that unlock ownership, opportunity, and generational wealth. As a senior director of the capital activation team at Impact Charitable, she partners with foundations and founders to design flexible pathways that shift capital towards community-driven solutions. Through this work, she has helped drive more than $82 million across 18 investment pathways, from funds backing underrepresented founders to models advancing home and employee ownership. And we just talked about in the previous episode, co-ops and employee ownership. Cindy is committed to reshaping financial systems to expand who has access to wealth building opportunities and financial inclusion, and focuses on creating investments that meet funder goals while addressing systemic barriers to wealth for founders and organizations. Cindy, welcome to the show.
I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for including me today.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask my first question that I ask all my guests, whoever comes on the show. And the first question is, what is your first memory of money, and or when did you realize that money had influence? For some people, that's the same story, but for some people, those are two different stories.
Yeah, so they're fairly combined for me. So I'll share with you that I, from my very earliest memories, remember having a piggy bank in my room. And in our house, we were all expected to contribute. So we all had chores and things that we would do every week, just as an expectation of being part of the family. I would get a small remuneration for that. When I started, this will date me a little bit. It was about 25 cents a week. So we will not do the inflation.
You were rolling in time.
I really was. And it gave me, as money can give you a little bit of a sense of empowerment. I think one of my earliest lessons around money, and one that I have carried with me. So I have an older sister, and my mom was a nutrition major in college. And so I was very lucky and fortunate to grow up in a house with a lot of healthy food. She would make homemade granola. She baked our bread. So this was the kind of house I lived in, which was,
wow.
Now I think that is amazing. When I was little, what I really wanted was a Twinkie and a sweet tart and a Fireball. Let's be clear. So my sister and I, and in her clever way, being older than I was, she started a candy club. So what she would do is take some of her money, and as I learned later, more of my money, and then she would go to the candy store and buy said candy, bring said candy home, and then share some of it with me. And while I thought, hey, this is great, it's some candy, once I started doing the math, I thought, okay, so I'm paying the middleman here. I may be being taken advantage of, and I don't know all of the things that are happening in the background to my money. And if I had more agency over those dollars, would I do things differently? And so this is, of course, adult Cindy looking back at and making all of these terms that we would use today in terms of agency and decision and who has control. But I do think it was an early lesson for me in understanding the financial system and understanding where it was working and not working. And that has translated so much into my work today, in understanding that our current financial systems are not working well for everyone.
Right.
And the more I can understand that and unravel it, the better system I believe we can all build in the financial place. So I think back to that a lot. I'm seeing my sister tonight, and I'm going to tell her I outed her on a podcast to the world as the candy club dictator. But we have moved past that in our relationship over time.
I love that. But I'm going to imagine as a kid, you're like, there was a moment where you were just like, whoa, wait a minute, right? As you said, you didn't have necessarily words for it, but you're like, the math isn't mathing. Like something I don't like, wait, what? And you probably, I don't know about you, but I remember having a similar moment like that. You just hear something, you're like, wait a minute, what do you mean she only bought it for 5 cents? What?
Uh-huh. Exactly. Those were my exact thoughts. And I started to put the pieces together.
Well, something we have in common, which I didn't know, my mom has been a vegetarian since the 70s.
Okay.
And so I grew up in a very healthy household. And you and I are close in age. So I remember health food back then just did not taste very good either. I was telling somebody the other day, like my mom, I remember like, and my mom wasn't a good cook on top of it. So that like made it worse. But I remember soy burgers used to come in a can, like 5 in a can. Like I remember, and they were so nasty. And my mom would just be like, oh, isn't this great? I'm like, no, it's not. It's not great. This is awful.
So you can relate to my love of candy, right? To supplement some of those not as great nutritional items that we were getting.
But I also think, like you were saying, like that created very healthy habits. And to this day, well, did go through a period of college where I was like, "Ah, nah, 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 nah." I to this day, like I cannot have like bad food in my body. Like it just doesn't feel good. And
True.
the smell of some of fast food places just like it makes me actually kind of like gag a little bit. So
I hear you. I'm the same way. I am grateful now. In the moment, I had some mixed feelings.
oh yeah, it totally sucked. But
Yeah,
let's move on. That's not what the listeners came to listen to.
it is not.
So my next question is, so as you had that as a foundation, what has been your money journey like? And then how did you fall into this kind of work? I always like to talk about there's no college degree for the work that we do. So, tell us a little bit about just your own personal money journey and struggles maybe that you've had with money and then also getting into this career that's really hyper focused on money.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, I did. I had a very fortunate upbringing, and so the nice thing I think that my parents taught us is that we had enough, right? And once we got to our enough, then there were lots of other things that we could do. So we gave to our church community, we gave to lots of organizations within our larger community. It was a stabilizing force for me to know that we had enough, right? I'm very grateful. I didn't have to worry that my next meal wasn't going to come. And I also appreciated that they were like, well, we need to just keep amassing things then. Like, we just need to keep pulling things in. It was like, okay, we're good. And now what else? And I think that has been helpful for me, particularly as I grew and matured and saw that not everyone had that same experience and that there were experiences on other ends of the spectrum from that. So folks who didn't have enough, and there were folks who on the other end of the spectrum had what I would have considered enough, but they didn't think it was enough, right? And so I think it's been an interesting thing for me to continue to think about what is that enough for me, and to help other people think through that. Because I think as we look at the larger financial system, we're very much built on a scarcity mentality. And what we say at Impact Charitable is that it isn't that there's a lack of capital. It's the uncreative and conventional deployment of it that's keeping it on the sidelines. So that's an interesting concept that I think has translated through my life. So when I was able to reach that stability, I was able to step back and look back and say, okay, so there are a lot of inequities. This is not working for everyone, right? Opportunity and access are not aligned, all of those things. So as I started work, my undergraduate degree is in journalism, and I started out working at the paper. So very much trying to bring voice to the voiceless, elevate issues, right? All of the things that news at that time in particular was able to do really helped me get more connected to community, which led me to work in foundations, which was where I spent a large part of my career before I ended up at Impact Charitable. And that was a fascinating look at wealth and power, right? And foundations sit on a lot of money, and it was a very good lesson for me in the fact that we equate intelligence and power to money, regardless of whether those things
right exist.
be connected. Right. So thankfully, I got to learn a lot of those lessons early, that I was not the smartest and the most thoughtful and all the things that nonprofits would say to me as a program officer, simply because I was connected to the check they were hoping to get. And so understanding the imbalance around power and money was a really powerful lesson for me early on as well. And trying to break that down has been part of my continuing career and how we try to think about right-sizing all of those pieces. I think for me, the light came on when I worked at the Women's Foundation here in Colorado. And when we worked there, our endowment was smaller, right? All of these things are relative, but our endowment was smaller. But what we leaned into was the power of our community and understanding that there were so many levers we could pull to try to advance opportunity for women and girls in Colorado. And what I mean by that is we did research to actually understand the state of women and girls in Colorado. So why were young women not graduating from high school? Why were women in their 60s and 70s unable to support themselves, right? All of these things that we see that affect women very differently than men. Understanding the research in Colorado, so we knew our context. We actually had a lobbyist on Capitol Hill here in Denver to look at very specific legislation to help support women and girls. Things like the cliff effect. So if you earn 25 cents more an hour, but you lose all of your childcare support, that actually doesn't work for families. And we know that, but the way the legislation is written. So we would take on issues like that. And at that point, this was a dozen years ago, 13 years ago, we started thinking about how our endowment was aligned with our mission. So were we investing in companies that had more women in the C-suite, that had more women on boards, that were really supporting women in any number of ways? And how could we shift our money into those places? And that was my real aha moment of, okay, I've been working in grant making, which is one way to do things. But I was getting increasingly frustrated with the pace of change, which I felt was way too slow for what we needed to actually bring equity to so many more people. And so really shifted my thinking in that time into the space of integrated capital, which I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about as well. How do we use a range of different capital tools to advance the social change that we want to see? And how do we think differently about the role of money in transactions? I've said this a number of times recently in different things. The goal of money is not to make money. And I think we've lost that a lot in our conversations and how we think about investing. That is actually not the goal of money. I think the goal of money is to create value. And what that can look a number of different ways in a number of different contexts. But if you reframe that conversation, I think that helps you get to a place, particularly in the space that I work in now in impact investing, that we focus on impact first and return second. And so that is actually the goal of money, is to create good things for people and planet, not necessarily just to create more money. So that's sort of my path getting here. I will say, to your point, I do not have a finance background. I wish now I had taken more classes in finance.
I don't know if it would have helped. I mean, I actually find that the perspective that we bring, well, I mean, I started in finance. So I was a stock analyst way back in ancient times, and I ended up leaving and had a long career in marketing. But I often tell people it's because we're not like, we don't have that stink on us. like we're able to question in a different way, which means we're able to come up with solutions in a different way of like, yes, this is a field that is highly regulated, but there are workarounds, right? And there are legal workarounds to actually get to the outcome that we're looking for, even though the system is not set up to optimize the outcomes we're looking for. They're set up to optimize a different outcome, which is concentrated wealth, concentrated power, concentrated all the things, right? And like I said, just literally the previous episode, I talked about cooperatives and why that might be a structure that people will look at, is because if you are trying to maintain a community to look the way that it looks and prevent private equity from coming in and changing how your neighborhood looks, right? This could be a pathway to do it. Now, that doesn't mean we're excluding making money, right? I don't think anybody is saying here, like, making money is bad, but can we think about reimagineering what it looks like and the distance between the least of us and the most of us?
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. I wish I understood finance a little better. And what I have learned over my career is that lots of people do, and they can be my good friends and colleagues, and we can work together on that. But I do think, to your point, like questioning, like, why is it that way? Why do we make it overly complicated? I think the things that perpetuate, right, the dominant culture and status quo and all the isms is speed, shame, and silence, right? And finance is very much part of this. We're going to move faster to not explain things to you, right? We're going to make you feel terrible for not understanding it, right? And we're not going to talk about money. And so those things, I think, have perpetuated a finance system, exactly to your point, that's working really well for a few people, but makes the rest of us feel like we can't engage. And so questioning that, because I don't have all the answers about finance, I do think has been helpful as we've tried to create new pathways and new tools and new ways for capital to flow.
I love that. And we're going to get more into the work of Impact Charitable when we come back from the break. So you definitely are not going to want to miss it. You're listening to the Do Different Better Show. I have my guest, Cindy Willard from Impact Charitable. And stick around and join us after the break in segment 2, where we're going to get into more about the work of Impact Charitable. See you then. Welcome back to this segment of the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and I have my amazing guest, Cindy Willard from Impact Charitable. And in the first episode, we really talked about Cindy's money journey, her earliest money memories, and how she kind of landed into this work. And now we're actually going to get into the meat of it. I am a big fan of Impact Charitable and the work that they're doing. So let's not delay. Tell us, Cindy, what is Impact Charitable? What do they do?
We consider ourselves an impact capital catalyst. So we get money from where it is to where it wants to go, focused on impact first projects. As you think about the spectrum of capital, we have sort of grants on one end and really high earning sort of extractive finance on the other. We live closer to the grant side of things. So we focused on impact first, thinking about how do we move capital to get results and to get a financial return. We want both, and we absolutely expect both, but we maybe balance those two things a little bit differently than someone who might be return first and impact second. We largely work with philanthropic capital, which gives us the opportunity to rethink a lot of things. So we can rethink, we think a lot about who's leading these projects and who's going to benefit from them, because we know there are significant capital gaps that exist based on historical inequities. And our mission is to fill those gaps with capital to help create more access, more opportunity, more equity, a better world for all of us. We also think about how. So how are we structuring those dollars? And we have used, over the life of Impact Charitable, 18 different financial instruments to meet the needs of entrepreneurs, funds, projects. So things like revenue-based financing that can be really helpful if your business is cyclical or seasonal. We have done equity investments, which can really help if you're in a growth stage and want to really propel your business. We have done debt that has a 2-year grace period before interest and principal payments start. So lots of flexibility, which we try to build in. The other thing we try to work on whenever we can is to try to shift power and decision-making in impact investing. Because if we do the first two things, we'll do some great work. But until we start to shift who's making decisions, we don't feel like we will have completed the work that we need to do. So as often as we can, which isn't all the time, but as often as we can, we try to build in community-led investment committees to help inform both the underwriting, so the criteria we use to decide upon investments, and then to make those decisions. Because we feel like people with lived experience who've been deeply ingrained in understanding these issues for a long time are really well positioned to make investments. And again, even if they don't understand all of the finance pieces, we can help provide some information and some background, but they may understand what the entrepreneur really needs, or how the community is viewing that business, or what the opportunity for growth is that other folks might not see. And we've found that to be a really, really valuable part of what we do.
Can you give us some idea of what's maybe your largest check size and your smallest check size that you on out of these projects that you've worked on, just to give the audience a scope and scale of what we're talking about?
Yes. We feel like impact investing should be available to everyone. So we have done investments as small as $5,000.
Oh,
and
wow.
we have done that because sometimes that's the capital that's needed. And we have done investments as large as 5 million because depending on the project and the scale, right? Sometimes really big projects like housing and infrastructure and capital, right, for all these things requires a higher dollar amount. Right. And sometimes a $25,000 check can be the meaningful change for an entrepreneur as they're building their first product or getting their manufacturing set up, or all of those pieces. So we have a pretty wide range of amounts that we'll invest. Again, the thing that drives all of our work is what's the impact of that, right? Is it an entrepreneur who isn't getting funding anywhere else? That's impact for us. Is it something really amazing for people employing it? Are you employing people who've formerly been incarcerated and really giving them a chance to rebuild their lives? Is it working on environmental issues and removing plastic from the waste stream that we know is going to benefit all of us, because no one wants microplastics in their systems? All those kinds of things. So lots of different kinds of impact, different sizes of investments, different types of investments.
And is the impact driven by Impact Charitable, of like, we're going to cast this wide net of impact, or is it driven by your investor partners?
Often we sit in the middle of the partnership between the source of capital and the use of capital. So those folks have often found each other and they know they want to work together, but they need some help getting across the finish line. And that's really where we can play a helpful role, both in thinking about what could be the impacts that we'd like to understand from this project and getting the plumbing set up. So we are impact theme agnostic. We're happy to work on any of a number of things. Again, we like to fill capital gaps and we like to think about who, because we feel like that's an important role for us. So really thinking about who doesn't have access and how can we create more access. But whether it's homeownership, right, for people who've been left out of the system. So we've done some amazing work. I love to talk about them because Aisha is phenomenal. The Deerfield Fund for Black Wealth here in Colorado has a home down payment appreciation model where they're helping first-time Black homeowners access home ownership by providing down payment support. And so we actually have an equity investment into that fund that has, I think there are over 200 homeowners at this point, which is phenomenal. It's just amazing, their work they're doing, helping people access both stability and security and what home means to all of us, as well as creating the opportunity for generational wealth building, which we know is critical for families. So that's one example. But that we've also done things on regenerative agriculture. I'm thinking about how do we support land and food production for local nutrition for folks, which is something you and I can appreciate given our. So lots of different ranges of things. We try not to limit it because, again, our goal is not necessarily a specific impact theme, but to get the capital to where it needs to go, where it hasn't been, in a way that is helpful and supportive and not extractive.
So you talked about people come with sort of their institutional investor or maybe private investor. Do you have people who have access to capital who come to you and say like, hey, do you have places where I could deploy my money?
We do from time to time. Yep. And I had an email yesterday from someone who's looking at both regenerative agriculture and reproductive rights opportunities. And she said, what do you know in this space? What might be interesting? What could you share with us from that perspective? I think as we are doing more work in the ownership economy, there's a great group of folks, including your conversation about co-ops, that are really helping all of us think about that. And so that's a very collaborative network where we're sharing opportunities and thinking about different ways to do investments. But we do have folks who come to us and say, I'm really interested in impact investing. Here are the themes that we'd like to take a look at. What are you seeing in that space?
That's amazing. And I would love for it to be normalized, right? And when I was in a conversation yesterday, and I said to a group of investors, I said, let me be perfectly clear. Entrepreneurs do not care that you're an impact investor. They care, are you going to give them the capital or not? Because I was asked at our last conference, which I believe you were at, what did the person say? They asked the question of around I wish I could remember what the question was. I remembered it yesterday, but something about like, how do entrepreneurs find impact investors? I'm like, they don't care. Like, they don't care that that's your thesis, right?
Yeah.
But it is valuable and important because your capital ideally will be less extractive than some other type of capital. But when they're going out and looking for money, they're not looking for necessarily an impact investor. They're looking for an investor. And if it happens to be somebody who cares about impact, that's a bonus.
Right? Yes. Yes. We just need more capital to flow, right?
We need more capital to flow. And I always say, I know you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, like, there's plenty of money in the world. Like there's plenty and I know philanthropy likes to say, well, we're only like $550 billion of like all the capital. Like, it's like, okay, yeah, but, and that's still a lot of money. Right. And, I remember having a conversation with an investment officer of a very large foundation. And we were at a conference and we had just left a session and we were walking down the stairs and it was a conversation about perpetuity, right? And for those of you who are listening, foundations usually have a sight of like being around forever, which is why they only spend out a small percentage, usually 5% of their whole entire portfolio in grants. And I said to this person, what is the conversation at your organization about around perpetuity? And this person replied, "Oh, I can't touch that conversation with a 10-foot pole. Like that's a non-starter. Like the organization wants to be around forever, and so I can't talk to them about me possibly sunsetting or shifting." And then she followed up with we went down a couple more steps, and she followed up by saying, "Well, and there's always going to be social problems." And that slapped me in the face, to which I responded, well, that's not how there's a different reality that we can maybe consider. I said, what would it look like if every single foundation closed? And could we leverage that investment to maybe mitigate as some key systemic social problems, like the root causes of some social problems, right?
Yes.
And it was funny because her head kind of like she turned and looked at me and was like, huh, like she'd never thought about what it could look like if every philanthropic organization closed and really there was a concentrated effort to actually deal with some of the undergirding societal issues. And could it be leveraged to like actually undo maybe one thing? Yeah. Like, that then would have a systemic impact have a ripple effect on a lot. Now, will there be problems? I think as long as you have humans want to fight. And so, yes, there will be problems, right? Yeah. But can we do something grand and systemic that fundamentally shifts how our communities work, which means we will interact differently with one another? That, I think, for me is such a powerful, dream.
I love that thinking. I love it because it's part of the problem we see in finance is the problem we see in foundations, right? There's this traditional mindset that we need to exist forever. And in finance, the mindset of, well, your money has to always be making money, right? Those things aren't necessarily true. There's stories we've told ourselves, but they don't have to be the stories we continue to tell ourselves. We can tell ourselves the story of, if I spend out this money based on community input, we could have a very different result in 10 or 15 years, right? And we're seeing some foundations leading in that space. I think we think about that in the donor advised fund space, which are a little bit different than foundations, right? But they don't have a mandated spend out. No. And we use donor advised funds as a tool. I don't position us as a donor advised fund provider because when folks come to us, I ask, are you ready to move the money? We have a number of beautiful investments for you. You may know of investments, right? We could start a fund in Minneapolis, in Denver, in Chicago, right, that can support folks? Do you have grants that you want to move in the next 18 months? Then we can help you. If this is simply a tax avoidance strategy for you, may I recommend a number of other places where I think you will be more comfortable, because we're in the same, we want to get the money flowing. We want to get out into the world. And we feel like there's amazing opportunity to do that, particularly using this capital, because we can redefine risk. And that's, I think, an important piece of the work.
And I think that's really happening with the next generation. So like second generation, third generation, G3, and now coming in G4, generation 4, from, the wealth holder. They really want to do something different. I remember I was at Cavallo. I was at an event at Cavallo in the Bay Area, and it was a whole bunch of, high net worth people. And we were talking about philanthropy, and I said at the time, younger people. And when I meant younger people, I meant me, which I was in my 40s at the time. I said, younger people, like, we're not interested in having our name on a wall. We're not interested in having our name on a brick. We want to be able to drive by our investment. Like, we want to be able to see that business. I invested in that business, and I got my capital back, or I gave them the money, right? But I know that they're thriving, and there's a line around the corner because I helped them get to the next level. And now that business is going to stay here. They're going to be able to feed their family and grow. That kid is going to be able to go to college, right? So what are you seeing as we wrap up this segment? What are you hearing and seeing from the next generation? And sometimes the next generation are 50-year-olds because they're just now accessing the capital now. But what are you hearing and seeing that they're prioritizing? And are you seeing a difference? Are you seeing differences between generations, or even differences across gender?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I'm seeing very much what you just outlined, is that folks who are younger have been hearing some different stories about money, which is great, which is you can use it to benefit a much broader range of things. You don't have to hold on to it forever. And I do believe that folks who tend to skew younger, and particularly folks who identify as women, tend to think about impact alongside the finance. You and I have been thinking about integrated capital for a decade, right? The data show, from World Economic Forum, that younger people and women think impact is as important as returns. And so how do we support that change? By supporting those local businesses, right, that are doing great things and being in their community, right? They're employing folks locally. They're being part of supporting, local sponsorships. They're engaging in city policy and having those important discussions that affect all of us, right? Like, all of those pieces we're seeing more and more. And I think part of our job at Impact Charitable is to help folks think about that philanthropic capital in that way, right? How can we use money that you might be thinking about for social and environmental change? Can we use that for impact investing, which I would argue in many cases has a longer and more profound effect on that entrepreneur who can change that community, which will make it better over the longer term, right? And thinking about those pieces. So I do think as we're seeing shifts in generation and we're seeing this wealth transfer, I'm excited that more people are thinking about both impact and return and how they engage themselves in making those positive changes. And I think that's going to be a boon for us in the coming decades.
I love that. Well, we have been talking to Cindy Willard of Impact Charitable. You're listening to the Do.Different.Better Show. We have been talking about the organization Impact Charitable, what they do, how they can leverage your money, but also how they can be an alternative if you're looking for investment. And they have a wonderful array of products and that or projects that are investable, that are impact first, but also have a return on investment. Coming up in segment 2, we're going to actually get into the field. We're going to be talking about how does somebody get started in this work. We talked a little bit about our crazy journey and how it wasn't necessarily a direct line, but we're going to really talk more about that. And what does impact investors need to be doing more of? What do we need them to do less of? And we're going to talk about some practical and tactical ways that you can become an impact investor. So stay tuned to the Do.Different.Better Show, and I will see you after the break. Welcome back to the final segment of the Do Different Better Show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. I am sitting here with the amazing Cindy Willard from Impact Charitable. And we've been talking about a wide range of things. One, around what is Impact Charitable and how their work in moving the $82 million that they have moved into community-driven solutions has been transformational. And what we're seeing as far as what's happening in the field. And now we're going to go in a little bit deeper, because one of my subversive, not so subversive objectives with this show is I want to get more people into finance, particularly women and people of color. So this segment, we're going to be really talking about the field of finance, particularly impact investing and all that comes with that. So Cindy, we talked a little bit about the first segment of like, what was your journey? And I talk about how there's really no college career. There's not even a certification for like the work that we do. I don't know that there should be, but maybe going a little bit further of like, how did you land at Impact Capital? Like, what were you doing before? How did the job come about? And a little bit about what you've even seen with other people who have like found their way into Impact Charitable.
Yeah, that's a great question, because it is a circuitous path for many into this space. I think for the people that I know, you included, like, our heart is in creating a better world, right? To solving these inequities, right? To creating more opportunity. Like, it comes from that passion and purpose, which I also feel like younger generations need in their life and work, right? I think we've all needed it, but I think the recognition that that's an important part of who we are as people is really important. So all of the folks that I work with have that shared passion, and it may look a little bit differently from person to person, but it's that sort of internal drive to make things better that is really important if you want to be in impact investing. And I have seen that across people. So that to me is more important than sort of the technical skills, which one can learn. I think the other piece for me and how I sort of got into it. So once the light bulb came on after I was at the Women's Foundation, I'm like, okay, there are new and different ways. I started doing a lot of reading and following thought leaders in the space, right? And that, I know people are like, oh, I don't really want to do more reading. I've finished that part of my life. But I do think it's helpful. I do think there are a lot of great blogs. There are actually more and more podcasts in this space, which I love, including this one. Lots of ways for you to sort of see what's happening in the broader field. And I think that's helpful just to create, help one understand the ecosystem so you can figure out where you want to slot in, because there are lots of ways to be engaged in impact investing. You do not have to be a financial analyst. That is not the only job in impact investing. We need people who do that, and I love them, but that is not the only thing we need. A lot of what we need, and I think I sort of see my role in this, is to be the relational person who connects the dots, who understands the systems and structures, and who can start to build the new things, right? And that's not, again, something you can learn, but as you know more about yourself, that's a role we need in this space, right? We need people who question and push and think about what's different, right? And that's a skill set, and lots of folks have that. We need people who are thinking about the advocacy and the rulemaking. So we need accountants and lawyers who really want to reshape things. Those folks can be some of the most important in your operation. And so if that's the work that you love and you want to bring more mission and purpose to that, we need a lot of more folks in that space. So I think there's lots of ways to come into it. I think reading and understanding the ecosystem, I think intentionally building your network. So going to places where these folks are having these conversations, participating in a conference, right? And you can do that even if you don't have a lot of monetary resources. You could volunteer to help support at registration, right? You can volunteer to be a room monitor and help get things set up. So there's lots of ways to access these opportunities without having to pay for them. I never tell people to go get an MBA because I don't think that's helpful.
Listen, let me tell you, I can do a whole show on a rant on MBA. I've always said, and I was a college recruiter, I'm like, MBAs give you enough information to be dangerous and reckless, because you don't really, you have two subjects, you have two classes on 4 subjects. That's typically an MBA. So you learn enough about nothing about everything, and it's not really helpful. And then you just come in, like, I literally am in this accelerator with this gentleman who just got his MBA, and he keeps spouting off things from Harvard Business Review. And as somebody, he's obviously a lot younger than me. And as somebody who's been a business owner, because we're in this business through, entrepreneurship through acquisition. And I'm like, dude, what you're saying is like not real. Like, I know that was in a Harvard Business Review book, but I'm telling you, as a business owner of 4 businesses, that is not real.
Yes. And that's where I think, I hope we can all continue to lean into that lived experience, because I think that's what's going to transform impact investing. Because when someone can say to me as an entrepreneur, I tried this kind of financing, it didn't work for me, but that's all that's on the market, that helps me understand what else we might need to build to fill that gap, right? And to your point, like, what have you learned as a business owner that's actually much more helpful to this person, right? And those folks in impact investing are hugely helpful to walk alongside people on their journey to help think about impact and business, right? It's much more complicated than just thinking about business, right? These impact entrepreneurs are the most amazing people because they are balancing a number of things. And that's what we need, right, to create the kind of world that I want to live in. And so supporting those folks is really important. I think the other thing I'll say that was really a profound help to me, and is now the network I rely on a lot, is I was lucky enough to go through the Just Economy Institute fellowship. And so finding a fellowship that can help you, we did a lot of personal work, right? We did a lot of community work, and we did a lot of systems work. And so if there are opportunities like that, even within your community in a leadership development program that might exist, to think about how you create those networks of people who have those shared values and who want to pull toward the same thing. I think that has been really transformational for me in this journey, to know that I can call Elaine, and I can call Nidia, and I can call Chen, right? Anytime I need to have these conversations. That's been really important on my professional journey. And I think in impact investing, we are part of this beautiful web that we're continuing to build. And so finding your networks within that, I think, can be really helpful for folks.
Yeah, I don't know if you know, but I was a first part of the first JEI cohort. And, people always ask me, well, how was it? And I said, well, it was like a first pancake, like, right. I mean, it was messy, but it was edible. Like, it was great. But it was like a little like, what are we doing? How are we doing? But I think, again, and the fact that accelerator or that fellowship has been going on every year now, I think for almost 10 years. Now that network has grown so much, and there's so many people I still have yet to meet in that network. What are maybe some other networks that you think are very valuable that people should plug into if they're interested in this space, or maybe they're in this space and they're looking for a community?
Yeah, I think, checking out sort of locally what's happening. Sometimes there are groups of angel impact investors that you can be connected with. And again, even if you don't have a ton of your own money, there are ways to connect and learn with those folks. So don't let that stand in your way. Often those groups are really interested in the sharing and the learning of all of that as much as the investing, which I think is great. And so there may be a local group in your community that does that. There are some larger sort of national groups if you're affiliated with things. So if you're part of a foundation, there are local or national foundation associations that think a lot about impact investing. Getting involved in a local cooperative, or thinking about there's some local real estate collectives. Like, start paying attention in your community where those interesting things are happening, and start engaging with those folks, because they're going to be connected to those larger communities. I think about, we have a wonderful new project happening here in Denver that's thinking about taking a space that has been environmentally degraded for years, but the community who has lived there forever doesn't want it to be gentrified. So many things in Denver, right, are being gentrified, and things are moving too quickly for folks, right? And those who have the capital are displacing those who don't. This community has really banded together and are thinking about what's the shared commercial space we need, what's the shared open space we need for people's well-being, and what's the shared housing that we need. And so those things are likely happening in your community. Get connected with them, because those are interesting ways to learn about the different financing mechanisms they're thinking about, right? how they're involving the community members in that decision making, which is critical to this, right? And all of those pieces. So I would say there is something happening in your neighborhood, interesting like that, that you could try to opt into, and that'll start increasing your knowledge, increasing your experience, increasing your network. And that's, something, it takes time, which I know is a very valuable resource, and you're going to get a lot of benefit from it. So I've done that in our community as well, opting into some of those really fabulous projects, and that's expanded my knowledge and my networks as well.
Same here. I remember when I was at my last job and I knew that I knew I wanted to get into this space. I wasn't sure how. I didn't know exactly what I had to offer, but I just started attending everything. I started just drinking from a fire hose and just going to every convening I could, whether it be in town or out of town, I would try to find my way into these convenings. And I did that over the course of 4 years. So I didn't jump into this space like right away. I really took my time and really wanted to figure out what was the voice that I had to lend to it, where were the opportunities. And I often tell people that want to get into this field, I said, you can kind of make your own job. Like you just got to kind of take a business approach of like, what's the need, what's the gap, and what do I have to offer? And then I said, pitch a job to an organization, whether it's a foundation, whether it's a small business, like pitch a job. And if you can make a business case for it, make it hard for them to say no. I said, the jobs that I've had, like I pitched the job and I'm like, so this work is almost a little Wild Westy, still a little bit. So you can be creative. So I think to your point of like, my finance background is like 30 years old. Like I was a stock analyst, like I just researched stocks. So that's a very small piece of the finance sector. But like you, I didn't come with like, I'm an actuary or I've done investment banking or I haven't even worked in a bank. Right. And still knowing that you can find a path in this job and learn along the way and collect a network of experts that you can call on if like, I don't know how to structure this deal. I don't know, right? There are other people that can do that. Well, in our final like sort of moments here on the show, like I want to ask you, what do you think we need to see more of, and what do we need to see less of within the impact investing space?
Yeah, I would love to see more women and people of color, as you spoke of earlier. I think finance has been largely dominated by a single identity for a long time, with largely specific purpose behind that, but we're starting to see that shift. And so I would love for us to continue to do that. I think, how we think about that at Impact Charitable is, can we create internship opportunities for folks to get that experience? Because when you go to apply for a job, folks want to know you've done something related, right? I mean, so that is sort of this catch-22, right? So how do we create that access for folks? I think, and we've seen this, but I'd love to see it continue, is lots of great collaboration. So what are you saying? What are we saying? How are you writing this up? Well, we're writing it up this way. We have this kind of agreement. What do you have? I love that mostly what I have found is that folks are willing to share, and that there is some co-opetition, which I know is an odd word, but
I love that word. I use that word all the time.
Yeah. This field is expanding. And again, this is back to my enough. There's enough for everyone. There's enough work for everyone. There is enough money for us to do this. I feel like there is enough. So let's all figure out how we build enough for build together. And I've seen a lot of that. I'd love to see more of that. I think what we need less of is people saying, well, but we've always done it this way. Someone else says that to me, I tell you what, that's a conversation ender for me very quickly.
I love that.
I would also like to see less of money sitting on the sidelines. I would like to see more money activated. And what we've learned is that if you do one of these deals, you're going to do a bunch more. So I would like to see less people saying, oh, I just don't know. And more people saying, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. Let's just do it.
I love that. And I'm going to take that as your tactical and practical thing for our listeners. Just start. I say, get off zero. Just get off zero.
Yes.
Just start. I love that. Well, thank you so much. We have been listening to the prolific Cindy Willard of Impact Charitable, my good friend who I adore, one of the smartest people I know. And we're now wrapping up this episode. Wow, it's amazing how much 45 minutes has gone by. But that's it for today's Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. Thank you, Cindy, for being on the show.
Oh, it was my pleasure to be here. I love what you're doing, and I know we're going to find great ways to work together.
Absolutely. So whether you're starting or joining or just curious about impact, definitely go back and take some of the things that we've said to heart. Definitely check out Impact Charitable. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite platform. Tag an investor or tag a partner or tag a friend who is either interested in pursuing this as a career or maybe interested in moving some more capital in a much more impactful way. Send me your questions over YouTube. I can't wait to see you. And until next time, keep doing different better. I'll see you in the next episodes.